and welcome back to today's video. So I got a new sheet of paper, and even though it's meant for colored pencils, as you can see displayed by this drawing, I wanted to use it for watercolor, which I have not done in a very long time, almost 2 to 3 years at this point. So I decided to take you along for the journey. I'm showing you sort of the texture of this paper as it reminded me of almost cold press, which I've seen in several of my craft stores whenever I visit and look at the shiny art supplies. I'm showing you a few of my utensils, and we will get straight into it. So for the sketch, I decided I didn't really know what I was doing, and I also wasn't sure how the process of watercolor was going to go. So I decided for this, I had one thing in mind. I wanted to use the color green, which is rare for me because I don't really use green purposefully in my drawings. So I decided I wanted green, and then as I kept sketching, I decided I also wanted braids. And you'll see me pause a few times to sort of think about what I'm drawing and what I'm doing. And while this sketch is going on, I decided to keep it relatively simple because I didn't know what to expect when I did this watercolor. And I actually ended up really liking this sketch, and as I'm watching the footage back, I still quite like it. It's simple enough to where I appreciate its composition, but still complex enough where I could mess around with the colors and have enough space. So, as I'm sort of wrapping up this sketch and you're seeing the final few slow-mo details, I'm going to start talking about what I prepared for this sort of thing. And I wasn't really sure what techniques I was going to use for watercolor because I can't really do watercolor line art because in the name, water, it's going to be transparent or at least translucent. So I wasn't sure how I was supposed to go about that. And I didn't really want to do like a lineless style. That's just not really my thing. So I decided to do colored pencils, and I think this ended up being in my best interest in hindsight. So I started out with the eyes, and I took this line art in the way I do it digitally, except in slightly different steps. When I do digital art, I like to sort of blend the skin tone into the bangs if my character has bangs. It just gives it a softer look overall. So for my colored pencil, I tried to remember how the colors would be sort of displayed. And you'll see once I move into the hair and sort of as I'm doing the eyes, you'll see me use a variety of colored pencils, which by the way, this is from the Artex set. I reviewed these a few weeks back, so definitely check out that video if you want an in-depth review. And I decided to sort of, you know how like in digital art you can like alpha lock your line art and you can change the color manually? That's kind of what I wanted to do here. And so that's why you can notice her bangs are red at the bottom, because I had the intentions to bleed her skin tone into it because again, watercolors are transparent / translucent. I knew I could get that effect. So it was really good for this piece because I kind of had a general idea of how it would plan out, but for future illustrations, I'm not really sure how I would go about this. I do think the colored pencil worked out great, and it didn't end up smudging, which was really, really nice, because I'm not sure if I own any pens currently that would smudge with water or would not smudge with water. But overall, it was a good choice. I've seen most of my watercolor artworks through an artist that I follow here on YouTube, which is rinspirit_art, and she makes amazing stuff. Totally check her out. I'll leave her linked. And this is sort of where this watercolor idea, stemmed from. And she does her line art a little differently than I did. She doesn't use colored pencils, but I felt for this first attempt it would just be sort of foolproof for me. Here I'm showing my watercolor palettes. They're relatively small. I got them in like a bulk set for Christmas years ago, and I'm just recently sort of dabbling with them. So they are a bit chalky. I don't know if that comes across on camera. Then I'm using a water droplet tool. We just had this sitting around the house, and I'm assuming we used it for some other liquid. I don't remember at this point, but it was really useful for dropping water into my palette, so that way it made it easier. You can't see it in the screen, but I also had a dirty water cup. It wasn't dirty, but whenever I needed to clean my brush, I dipped it in that. So here I am putting her skin tone down, and originally it was way too thick, so you noticed I added a bit more water, and that helped the spreadability a lot. I found for these paints, I really had to douse them in water, or else they would be really thick, almost acrylic-like, except slightly more transparent. And here you can see me bleeding the skin tone into the bangs, which will make more sense once I get back to the hair. So here I am putting in the blush and the general shading. That first cheek needed a little more attention, but I gradually built up the layers, and it was really fun doing this actually, this sort of slow process, even though watercolor isn't really that slow. I actually have a screenshot from the edited footage, and in total, even with breaks, this only took me 1 hour and 50 minutes, which is an insanely quick time compared to some of my other videos when I record, which can take up to 3-4 hours. So I was really happy. Editing me did not mind editing this video. Here I am putting in the darker shadows, and I sort of made a mental note in my mind to just do even darker shadows once the skin tone had dried, because at this point it was still quite wet and the paper was starting to buckle, and I didn't really want that to continue buckling. If you don't know, buckling is when the paper starts to warp because you're putting too much product or water on it. And this paper isn't really meant for watercolor, as I stated earlier, so I kind of expected this. Here I am putting in some base shading on her clothing. I wasn't sure how dark I'd end up going with her sweater slash ruffle thing, so I just decided to plop some purple down because it's always a good shading color. Don't let anyone tell you it's not, because I love purple as a shading color. 10 out of 10, universal. So here I am starting to mix up the greens, and I did say I wanted to do minimal mixing for this. However, I decided that a few of the things I could just sort of place on my palette. Here I am doing the shading for the whites, and usually I like whites to look very vibrant, so I use a ton of colors in them. You can see it in several other versions of my art, whether it's digital, marker, colored pencil, etc., etc. So for this was no different. I wanted to mix up a few colors, so you notice I added a bit of green to the shadows and a bit of purple. All around, just wanted to make it fun and whimsical. Then I ended up putting this green down for the base of her sweater, and that purple ended up showing through a decent bit, so it was a good base color for the shading. And once all of these layers dry, I'll do other passes so that it can get even darker. I add a tiny bit of black to the paint so it also deepens as well, and just overall do a ton of shadows so I can sort of get them in here. I believe next I move on to the hair after going to her clothing, and this is where you can see her bangs kind of make more sense, because originally it just looked a bit messy, but now we're going to really start cleaning it up. Now, if I was using a lighter hair color, I'm not sure how well this would have worked, but hopefully I could sort of finagle it and reactivate the watercolor so it wouldn't be too dark. But here I am putting the black slash, it looks a bit gray because, you know, again, transparent. But it started to look really nice at this point, and I was very happy with the art piece. I loved how the colors were very fluid and it was making its own like washes and stuff. And you can see that I actually put the black over top of her skin tone, and it looked very light and airy, and I just really liked how it turned out. It reminded me of my digital art, which is always looking very clean, so I was pretty happy at the end of the day. Here I am filling in her braids, and the braids give me a little trouble. Whenever I draw braids, even as myself, I wear braids all the time, and whenever I draw myself, I always kind of struggle with this too. Shading braids can either be really oversimplified or overcomplex, so I decided to lean on the simpler side, so they don't have a ton of depth, but I still like how they turned out. I think her head bang, her scalp, most of where her hair reside is probably my favorite part. Then I do her eyes. I decided to do the sort of green slash blue that was on her sweater, but I think it ends up being more blue. And then here I am putting purple to shade her eyes because I thought it would be a good layering color, and I accidentally spilt a bit, but we cleaned it up just fine with a napkin, which is the great thing about watercolor. It cleans up very well. When I use acrylic, it takes a bit of scrubbing, so that was nice. Then I'm doing some final touch-up on her braids, but you can't really see it, it's off camera. So all in all, I really enjoyed this. Here I am layering some more purple, and this is where I start adding more shadows and more depth, so just adding more purple on top of things I've already painted. And overall, I really liked this process. It was very fun, and relative to some of my other art supplies, it was quick as well. Like, when I did my last acrylic video, I believe it was around the same sort of 9 minutes that is displayed here. However, it took way longer. And this just dried a lot faster, it was a lot easier to work with, and overall I just really enjoyed the process of watercolor. I think I'll definitely do some more videos in the future and maybe include an ASMR here and there. But here's the final product. I decided to add some hearts and a circle off camera. So I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you want to see another watercolor video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!